And as always, please, you can comment and also make sure you tag us on our social media page, just in case you've been, sandwiched between those situations, scenarios in which you've witnessed borders being crossed, or also situations in country or outbound in which you've witnessed some of these situations on our social media pages. Joy News on TV is regularly the page where you can also watch us streaming live on Facebook, and also at Joy News on TV being our Twitter handle. You can also watch us live through My Joy Online TV. It makes it easier for all of us. And Porous Borders should always be the hashtag, and also add the hashtag Joy News. As you tend to do that, what will be a great conversation as it dovetails into what the Africa office of the Commonwealth is doing. They are beginning a whole new series. Is going to be premiered or convened from this evening, and subsequently we're going to have for the other Commonwealth countries on the continent such series also being organized. And I have here with me John Appiah. John Appiah is the head of the Commonwealth Africa office. He's here. Good morning to you, John Appiah. Good morning. Yeah, nice meeting you once again. And Edward Kingston Jombla is the regional analyst, organized crime, violent extremism with ONEP. And ONEP is the West Africa Network for Peace Building. And thank you all for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
But you have this, you're convening this evening. It's the start of a series you're beginning as the Commonwealth Office for Africa.
Exactly. Specifically, the Common Speaker series is not always going to be around security.
Definitely.
Yes,
I should think so.
Yes. I think we'll run out of topics after.
Oh, definitely. If you just wanted to get it one sector focus. Yes.
Definitely. But I think what you're doing with Porous Borders is absolutely amazing, and I commend Joy and yourself for that. The speaker series, this one is our inaugural one. And we chose Ghana because this is where our headquarters is. But we thought that the issue of security and kidnapping and terrorism is extremely topical. It's something we've been interested in for a while. The Australian High Commission in June had a security conference or seminar, but that one was more for security within the mining area, although it still talked about security lapses and issues within Ghana and the rest of Africa. And the effect that what has happened in the Sahel region has had on sub-Saharan Africa. So I think this speaker series is just an extension of that, to dialogue and find actual practical solutions on how we can actually tackle what is happening.
And it's good that all of you are in, because as we begin this series, we began speaking to immigration service heads, various heads of the various border posts manning those areas for the customs, etc. And you get to find that there's a certain thin line between what the borders should be, because they're transient anyway. There's nothing that you get to see. But you get to find that the trickle effect of what a conflict in Northern Africa is, and also what we tend to perpetrate either for the countries in the northern part of our country, tend to have a certain effect on security. Is that the case also, per your observation at ONEP?
Yeah, certainly we have observed that there are relationships when it comes to issues of security and spillover effects, in terms of insecurity from one country to another. And I think vividly, if I could recall, in the 90s, we have late 80s, 90s, we have issues in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and we saw the spillover from the war in Liberia into Sierra Leone, and subsequently also issues of instability in Guinea and that of Cote d'Ivoire, and how that also spanned through the region, and we see a lot of uprising, a lot of issues, and in the 90s coming to current dates. But I think what is also very important that we have observed is this issue of, in as much as, yes, in the aspects of security we have issues, but there has been some practical gains made, especially in the area of democratic stability. As I talked about the issues in the Mano River Union, countries that have been fighting, and but they've been able to negotiate and mediate the conflict, and and build peace. And today we have seen democratic transition in those countries. And also we have seen how they are trying to also continue to develop. But the challenge is the aspect of how do we continue to build peace within these complex issues of security, particularly modern day threats like violent extremism, like issues of continue to ensure that we maintain our and sustain our democratic gains in the region.
Well, for example, if you read literature and even per your experience, you even know better. You have the Border Patrol agency, and then if it's for the United States or even for the UK, they tend to be well resourced in such a way that they tend to look out for the signs, using the right sort of methodologies, strategies, and also sort of equipment. In our case, if it's Ghana or Burkina Faso or let's say Nigeria, it's not something that you find that is a highlight of the work that they do. For the Commonwealth Office, how that becomes integral in the discussions that you want to have, for example?
Well, I think just leading on from what Edward said, the real problem for me, I think, started with the fall of Gaddafi in Libya. And what happened obviously there was that there was lots of ammunition and arms that were unguarded. And after the fall, the Tuareg helpers of Gaddafi, so that's why, for instance, in Mali now, you see the problems happening in Mali, because this actually acted as a catalyst for an illegal arms trade in which all of a sudden a lot of people in the Sahel and within northern parts of Africa were all having access to the best ammunition and machinery. And all this actually started, and I always call it the domino effect, because like you're saying, we have a real paradox here where we have ECOWAS and other organizations like the Commonwealth, like the UN, who are preaching integration. So we are thinking of our currency being integrated so that we can trade easier. But while that is happening, as you're saying, we've forgotten about what actually happens at the borders. Just because we're trading together or we have a single currency doesn't mean that we shouldn't be aware of the fact that there's rogue elements within all these places. And having no trade barriers doesn't mean not having porous borders. You know, I think we have to find that that difference between having an integrated system that works on an economic level, but still maintaining borders that function. And as you're saying, borders that are equipped. And I think it's just about prioritization. You know, in terms of spending money on things that don't work, or things that are short-term, in order to make either political gains or whatever you have, we need to actually spend the resources on the places that matter. Because security ends up affecting all of us in different ways, you know. And Ghana especially has always been the beacon of safety. When anyone in the diplomatic service is being posted to Ghana, they have a party.
No qualms.
No qualms, you know. They have a party because they know that I'm going to probably the safest part of Africa. Ghanaians are loving, Ghanaians are friendly, Ghana is safe, you know. And I think we're slowly losing that tag, you know. And
that kind of reputation. And so when we do the interactions, you get to find out, even before now and this advocacy we're doing, we had all this, I will call it hula baloo, if I can use the phrase, about how we have an influx of West African citizens and how that also threatens internal security. But the first point of conversation actually is their first port of call, which is the entry they make through the borders. Even for the so-called secured ones, it's still very elusive for us as border agents, as security people, as a country to be able to either verify, scrutinize, etc. How would we know whether we have rogue elements coming, radicalized, etc.?
Yeah, I think in the first place we have to be very careful as to how we situate this issue about official and unofficial migrants coming into to Ghana, because already, you know, at the ECOWAS level, we have the ECOWAS protocol on free movement of goods and people. We're supposed to integrate, we're supposed to move from one place to the other, but with the correct documents, with the correct papers that would allow you to stay or even possibly work in a particular country. But I think over time we have seen people usurping the opportunity that the free movement provides, and coming into countries without, you know, official or proper documentation. And as a result of that, of course, it has its own implications for peace and security. And within that context as well, we have to be careful not to blow that out of proportion as well. But in the aspect of, in the area of fear of infiltration, especially when we have, as you have shown already, we have long stretched and porous borders. It's not only the case of Ghana. I think also in almost all the countries in the region, we have very long and wide stretched porous borders. And if you go to some of those places, you see the kind of structures. There are issues, and the security as well as immigration personnel, you know, along those borders have been, from time immemorial, complaining about operational capacity to be able to man the borders. Some of those borders, they are just footpaths, right? And if you look at Ghana, I was reading, and that the Ghana Immigration Service has on paper 42 crossing points. But if you go to those, as you have visited, there are more illegal crossing points than those that are being manned. Even those that are being manned, how many personnel are there? How many of them, and how trained are they? How are they executed to ensure that they respect rights of migrants, human rights issues, to ensure that everything, you know, is in a package, you know, so that kind of thing. So then also, I think a critical threat is also the issue of our borders with particularly countries that already have some aspect of instability or some kind of insurgency, like Burkina Faso, now our border of Burkina Faso. And we have seen the rising trend in terms of the terrorists moving southwards and closer to the border with Ghana. And as a result of that, everyone, of course, the security and the state apparatus and agencies, they are all worried, and I'm sure they are putting in place the relevant mechanisms to be able to address those issues. But I think the threat is real, and of course, there have been some 1 or 2 arrests made. I think one in Omli, and where I suspected somebody with a gun was arrested in the church.
Citizen who was having a gun.
Allegedly a Burkinabe citizen with a gun. And also we saw in another border post where an alleged Burkinabe also bypassed border protocols and was arrested somewhere and those kinds of things. But these are the critical challenges that we have. Our borders are porous, and at the same time, you remember that we have people in those border communities that share the same languages. They have the same more or less households and
families,
cultural families and those things. So these are the difficulties that the security agencies face in terms of actually policing the border with their number of, or their strength at that level.
Well, John, such situations may not only be peculiar to Ghana. Even in, let's say, areas in Europe, you could find those thin lines, etc. But at the end of the day, we'll have some great talk. Like we're going to have some great enlightened discussions this morning, this evening, with what the Commonwealth Africa office is organizing. How do we translate those talks, those meaningful ideas that we tend to share, into one, policy actions that give a certain appropriation in expenditure for resourcing what institutions need to have, two, making sure we conscientize the citizens, etc., beyond these fora that we tend to have?
I think, as you're saying, a lot of the fora we've been having, or the forums we've been having, they've not been practical enough. And I think it's about going beyond being a talk shop to actually see how you can implement the solutions that are gotten from those type of meetings. And that's why, in terms of this this talk that we're having this evening, the stakeholders who are involved, we have yourselves involved, Joy is involved, as well as other media houses, other prominent media houses, as well as government agencies. We have members of the ruling government, we have members of the opposition, we have members of the clergy, both from the Muslim faith and from the Christian faith. We have all stakeholders involved to try and find solutions that work. And as from this point on, we're going to go forward in terms of having particular workshops. So as I speak now, my colleague Mina Mensah, who is the head of the Commonwealth Human Rights Office, she's on her way to Kumasi now for a training session for the Ghana Police Service on human rights and how to deal with citizenry. So the solutions that we have from events like this, we have to put into practical steps.
How do we monitor to make sure that is done? Because at the end of the day, after the event, the policy people, the governance people need to make sure they do all that.
Well, we'll definitely chase up with that, with the Minister of Security and with the ministry. But before, I just wanted to touch upon something quickly. I think one thing that concerned us from the Commonwealth perspective especially was that when the kidnappings happened, what you keep on seeing is the reference to Nigerians. And I remember...
And that was a worry for you?
That was a worry for me. And I remember when your studio actually interviewed me early on, and I actually spoke about stopping that vilification of Nigerians. Because I think for a lot of...
Because you thought it was homophobic or transcending into the sphere of...
Well, I think
homophobia.
Usually we try to find a scapegoat. And
for our own inefficiencies, you say.
Exactly. As we're talking about porous borders, etc., you know, they say charity begins at home. Go to where the source is. The source is that if there's particular rogue elements, you should have been able to track them from the beginning. If you're in the UK or other countries like that, even when you're driving, your number plate has been picked up by CCTV camera.
In the UK?
In the UK. That has sent it to the nearest police station.
In Ghana, has your number been picked by...
Ghana, even... Anyway, let's not get into that because
no, but we're doing discussion.
Yes,
so.
We have a Ghana Police Service where a lot of them are doing an amazingly good job, you know, and they are going to be on the panel today as well because there's a lot of questions that people want to hear on how the whole process was handled, both with the Canadian girls and with the Takoradi girls, you know, and it's good to be able to have them there to actually answer a lot of these questions because with social media now, if you don't watch out, social media goes ahead of you, you know. So it's good to be able to have your side of the story, to be able to explain what has happened and what you're doing to the public. But we are definitely going to push on the solutions that come out of the seminar today. We're going to push with government until a lot of them are actually implemented.
We seem to acknowledge the difficulties, the challenges or the problems we have. But it looks like for us, John earlier made or mentioned a word about prioritization. For us to do the commitment becomes a difficulty for us. Why is that? Because we have to put our money where our mouth is. And if we think this one is a priority, then we should then invest in. Why is it that we don't think some of these issues are more important than others? Because now it's at the front burner, terrorism, kidnapping, etc. It's an international issue. It's even become a sub-regional issue.
I think when the threat was actually very far away, you know,
or when we sent.
No, well, if you look at the
it
spread,
really was far away.
Yeah, if you look at the spread from Burkina, you know, it started from the north of Burkina, and that is closer, the border with Niger, and that is a little bit in terms of physical distance, right? You can say it's far away, but because we have seen the southward spread, right now from the north into the east, from the east central Burkina, and of course engulfing part of the south, which is now closer. So because we saw it coming, right, and we now think it's important that some actions being done. But I think before that, long ago, there has been some multilateral and bilateral cooperation within the region to, where they have been talking about the threats, not only between Ghana and its immediate neighbors, but also at the level of the AU, at the level of ECOWAS, and even UN. They've been talking. But I think, as you said, we have to walk the talk. We have to put some of these talks and decisions and resolutions into action. So at times when we go and our leaders go for meetings, when they come back, in terms of actually implementing some of those decisions is a challenge. And I think you want to know, why is it a challenge? So that is something which I think we're yet to unravel. And I think it's very important that we begin to prioritize some of these issues. And I do believe that countries in our region, they have attention in the area of security.
They do?
Yes, in terms of, if you look at...
That's passion.
Okay, let's...
Passion rarely doesn't get actions done.
Well, okay, if you say so, but if you look at our national budgets, for example, where I'm coming from, normally I like talking from the perspective of civil society that I've worked in Sierra Leone. You look at the number of, the amount of money allocated to security and our national budgets. You begin to see that, no, there is commitment, because you see government put more money.
Does it translate on the ground?
Well, that is the issue. That is the issue. That is the aspect that I'm talking about in terms of implementation. How do we ensure that what we have beautifully crafted on papers are implemented? What we have allocated for national security actually goes into national security issues.
It comes down to governance.
Yeah.
Governance, yes.
It all comes down to governance.
But it's always the African conundrum. We tend to have good ideas, nicely bound and put on the shelves, but they just don't get to walk out of the white sheets onto the ground.
Well, I think, and for the most part, we've always been quite reactive. Like Edward was saying, we wait until the problem is at our doorstep.
Yeah. Because we saw it from north. We waited till... And
then we tried to put a band-aid on it without actually getting to the source. The same with when Ebola was around us. Yes. As soon as that happens, they say, hey.
They say it's still around us. We think it's in Central Africa.
Exactly.
And so we're like, oh, it's far. It's like a few hours flight away. So
but we have DRC students in Ghana.
That is it. So a lot of our problems are very much like the fire service. We wait until the fire has hit the roof, then we call in the fire service to come. Whereas we could have taken preventative measures. And the reason why we're having this speaker series is to have a preventative measure, to be able to have all the stakeholders who are involved in one place, to come together, put our head together, and say, okay, what are we doing about this problem? Because security doesn't only cut across with terrorism, with disease as well, with what happened with Ebola, etc. That's all in terms of security. It cuts across borders.
Yeah.
It doesn't care where you are, and it really infiltrates the system and causes lots of other problems. So it's about time we saw the need for good security as one of the pillars for development.
Yeah. And it's good that we have this event because it's themed securing our countries from terrorism and kidnapping, the Commonwealth approach. And it will be on 4 p.m. today, of course, at the British Council, spearheaded by the Commonwealth Office. Is now for Africa. Is now stationed here in Ghana, so it will be live definitely here on Joy News. So we're a great partner for all the things that we have to do. But at the end of the day, we have to come to a head as we wrap up the discussion on this. But for what we're doing for advocacy, porous borders, it's making sure that we have good security at the entry point. But it also needs to be seen with a commitment. Over the period, we've seen the head of the immigration go and visit some of those areas. But over the years also, we've seen heads of ministries, departments, and agencies go and visit areas, lament, and it's good for the cameras, etc. How do we hold them accountable?
Well, I think it's the job of civil society and institutions like the media. Because now in this age of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, being able to actually compel governments to act has become much easier. You can start an online petition that all of a sudden picks up 500,000 followers.
You mean Ghana, when you have an online petition of 2 million people, it works? It doesn't move any government person.
I think
in
it
Africa,
does. I think it does much more than you realize. Because a lot of the African countries are looking at themselves internationally now. So I think it works. You don't even need 2 million people. You know, it just needs a few dedicated people who actually want to make their voice heard. For me, that's the most important thing. The passion of the people to actually have answers to the questions that they have, rather than even the number.
Okay. Mr. Jobla, what could be some of the finest solutions we can ever have to this?
Yeah, let me just
is it a predicament? You want to add something to
let
before
me
you
just add to what
please
John just said.
Please do.
If you have noticed the way in which the social media, you know, trend issues, and how our governments, you know, now also becoming very jittery as to the power of social media, so the power of the media, then to tell you that indeed they are also very much worried that we can hold them accountable, because those days when they do things, okay, those days you don't have the capacity to go to the border post to show what you have just done for the Ghanaian citizens to see, you know, how open their doors are, right? You have just shown them that. So now it is their responsibility to continue to engage government. So when they go for budget discussions, for example, they should be able to talk about, this is what is happening. We have seen clips of porous borders. We have seen deplorable conditions of our security personnel along the border posts. And then what's happening? How much money is being allocated for this? And how are you going to ensure that those monies are utilized properly? So we should begin to ask the questions. If we don't ask the questions, then they continue to do what they think they do best. So social media is also a power, and I think we have seen in places where before elections, how social media has been able to turn election results around in terms of people actually making decisions. You have those people who at very last moments make decisions based on credible stories or credible information they get from social media. Even at the last point.
Look at the Arab Spring.
Exactly. Look at the Arab Spring.
It hasn't happened in sub-Saharan Africa. That's a problem.
So there's a power in social media.
The skin, where black people live, it hasn't happened.
Well, I don't know.
So I don't know. That's why.
So that is the situation. So we have to ask questions. Citizens have to ask questions. We have the power to hold our leaders accountable. And until and unless we begin to do that, you know, our leaders will have field day. And I think we should not give them the opportunity to just do what they want to do. They are holding power in proxy of the citizens. That's why we voted them in. So we have to ask them in. This morning when I was waiting, I actually love this program you call Dear Nanado. You know, it presents, it's so, they are little clips, but they really send out a lot of information as to what is currently happening on the ground. The deplorable situation, water sanitation, security issues, right? Issues of migrants and migration and those things. You know, you go around and get those clips and show to the citizens and inform them. And then they, in turn, are able to make informed decisions and be able to hold their leaders accountable.
It's about utilizing the strengths that we have from social media, because the same social media is what the extremists are using to recruit people for a lot of these terrorist acts. But it's about being able to take hold of the narrative ourselves and being able to galvanize communities. And that's why a lot of our focus is on young people. We're trying to galvanize the young population to realize that they are active citizens of Ghana, they are active African citizens, they are active citizens of the Commonwealth. When that happens, you have a certain love for your continent, for the world, that makes you take particular actions, you know, and that is what we need for the next stage. I don't know whether with what happened, because the Arab Spring had a positive side, but at the same time, it had a negative side in terms of the violence attached to it, you know. I don't want to see that happening within sub-Saharan Africa. I want to see peaceful demonstrations that are able to bring the needed change without any bloodshed, without any killing. Because you can't fight fire with fire.
No.
The same people who are part of the Arab Spring, a large section of them are also rogue elements, or who later on, look at Osama bin Laden, for instance, you know, started fighting on the right side, and look at what happened, you know. So we have to be very careful of what we wish for ourselves.
At the end of the day, when our cameras go to these areas where we have security personnel who are supposed to be manning the borders, and some of the day-to-day dangers they tend to face, it keeps one wondering, how long is it going to take before we have a change? Not necessarily in attitude, but in their state, because that will also translate in the sort of motivation they have to do the work that they have to do. Because also, that would also reflect on how effectively as a country we're able to counter illegal migration, terrorism, drug trafficking, and so forth, as we tend to envisage.
Definitely, I think a link to terrorism that we found is to do with prosperity or economic deprivation, you know. And in the same way, the services are not able to implement a lot of what they would like to implement because they don't have the necessary training or the necessary equipment, and they're not even given that respect that they deserve, you know. And I think that is where there's something completely missing. And it comes back to being accountable. It comes back to governance. It comes back to prioritizing particular areas. There's particular areas that should be ring-fenced. Education, health, security. At the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the Commonwealth decided that the areas of prosperity, security, fairness, and sustainability were the main areas that the Commonwealth has to target. Those are the pillars of development in general, you know. And until we realize that the more you put into something, the more you get out of it, we'll be just going around in circles. So a lot has to be invested in our Ghana Police Service and our security forces.
Yeah, definitely.
And then let me just
add
you
to
wanted
that.
There is need for increased security presence and patrol at the border.
How many posts did you say you have at the last count?
Yes, I think, no.
We said we had 42.
Yes, I read that from the Ghana Immigration Service.
Sure. We all know what the statistics are.
But
over a stretch of some 2,000 kilometers,
yeah,
and 200 kilometers, it's more like from Accra to, let's say, Takrady. So you can imagine. You have how many of that? About 10 of that.
10 of
in
that.
terms of that distance alone. And you just have only some few border posts.
Few border posts. And
so it's a worry, right?
It is.
Few ill-equipped security personnel. In terms of communication, in terms of vehicle, going to patrol those long stretch
Actually,
areas.
the resources for the immigration service should rather be there, not in Accra. Because those in Accra virtually are not guarding the entry point.
You see, so this is the situation. So that's why we have to face it and to see how we can. And also the people, the citizens, we also have to support the immigration service as well as our security personnel. As you rightly said, they are not respected. And also because of the way they also carry themselves along the border post.
Well, the motivation is bad.
Issues
so they have
corruption
to. So they, I think, by behavioral perspective, then they carry themselves the way they have to do. But if you know,
it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it?
Yes,
You need to give the people respect. You need to pay them well. You need to equip them. You know, why should a policeman go into a gunfight with a terrorist or an armed robber who is better equipped than they are? They're holding batons.
And they are the legal people.
And
they
they're
rather are not
people,
equipped.
you know?
And the criminals rather are more equipped. Well, thank you very much. Edward Kingston Jombla is with WANEP. He's in charge of regional conflicts analysis. And he used to be the head of WANEP in Sierra Leone, I'm right?
Yes, please.
He's a big man. Yeah. And he'll be one of the speakers this evening at the event that the Commonwealth Office of Africa, the Africa Commonwealth Office, is convening at the British Council from 4 p.m. right here. And we had the head of the Commonwealth Africa Office, also here with us, John Appiah, helping us do the discussions. And we know that it all dovetailed into the overall advocacy we're undertaking here on Joy News, and we have the hashtag going with it, porous borders. And if you tend to comment on our social media pages and handles, make sure you add Joy News as well, alongside porous borders. But look, we're bringing you something new. Joy News is giving us an opportunity to have people speak to President Akufo-Addo. It is also an opportunity for all of us to get to know what is being done right per the promises that were given during the electioneering of 2016. We've captioned this, Diana Nado.